Hello everybody. This is the first video in the new series that I mentioned not that long ago called Now What? In this series, again, as I said, I'm just going to talk about situations you get into on the paintball field and kind of how I try to deal with them and my kind of advice for dealing with these situations. In this first one, I'm actually going to talk about something that's happened to me. Luckily it hasn't happened to me all that much recently, but it does fairly frequently, this happens. So I'm going to talk about what I do, or what I think you should do when you are alone on the paintball field against multiple opponents. So this can be where you are the last man standing in a game, you're the absolute last player on your team, or it could be that you just happen to be isolated from the rest of your team and they can't get to you to help you or whatever. So in either case, it's you against multiple opponents and you're on your own. Now what? The first thing, and this is really important, don't panic. Do not panic. The worst thing that's going to happen here is you're going to get shot, which happens all the time, so there's no reason to panic. This is no different than any other situation on the field, except you don't have someone backing you up. So keep your wits about you and just, take a few seconds when you realize you're alone to take a couple deep breaths, look around. If you have time, if people are shooting at you and everything, you might not have time to do this. Become aware of your surroundings and see what you can see and what you can learn about the situation before you do anything else, because you're going to have to be very careful and make sure that your moves are well thought out before you make them. Otherwise, you might have issues. My second piece of advice, if you're all alone, is don't get cornered. And this can mean a couple of different things. Obviously, try to avoid being in a corner of the field. Don't get stuck there where you have two tape lines on, a tape line on either side of you and you really have no flexibility as far as moving goes. But also, don't get cornered in a situation where you have people all around you and you are unable to move from your current position. Make sure you are able to be mobile, because movement is going to be one of your biggest advantages when you're on your own. Which brings me to point number 3, move. If you have room to move, do it. Don't stay in one place. The last thing you want to do is stay in one place and let your multiple opponents move on you to prevent you from moving. The more you move, the more people you are, if that makes sense at all. The less you move, the less effective you're going to be. So make sure, if you have the room to do so, keep moving. Don't stay in one place for too long, especially once people start making moves on you. Don't hesitate to immediately make a counter move to get out of whatever trap you're kind of being drawn into. The next thing is kind of a corollary to the movement, but it's don't be afraid to retreat. Use every direction at your disposal, up, down, left, and right. If you have only room to move laterally from side to side, do it. But if you have the depth on the field, if the field is long enough that you can drop back and then kind of go back forward at a different point on the field, absolutely do it. I've done this a couple times, and you can see in a couple of my FPS videos, I will drop back sometimes and then loop around and come back in a different direction, and that tends to be pretty effective, especially when you're on your own, because you can get people chasing you and then they might get a little careless. The final thing, if you're on your own, is to try to influence the flow of the game in such a way that allows you to fight your opponents one-on-one rather than 2 or 3 or 4-on-1. So if you have your opponents spread out in front of you or around you, 4 or 5 people around you, that's going to be a lot harder than if you can deal with each one individually. And this kind of goes with moving and especially retreating. In my FPS, Darwin FPS 7.2, if you check that out, in that game I get in a situation where I'm all alone against 4 or 5 opponents, and I actually retreat twice during that game without actually going for cover. I just put distance between us, and that's my cover for a couple of seconds each time. In making these steps backwards, instead of facing my opponents, across my front, they actually string out and I'm able to work up through them one at a time rather than having to fight more than one at any given time. So that actually took this numerical advantage that was against me and neutralized it by getting the opponents to string out so that I was facing them one at a time. In short, those are my advice for what to do when you get all on your own. Don't panic, gauge your situation, don't get cornered, don't be afraid to move, even backwards, and really try to play against your opponents one at a time. Thanks for watching. More of these videos to come down the road. I'll see you next time.